Wait a moment, how are you? How was your day? I know you clicked this video because you're looking for something to help you sleep. Don't worry, you're in the right place. Take a deep breath, relax, and let me share a story you might never forget. I wasn't exactly new to danger. After all, I'd been a Green Beret for nearly a decade, and this wasn't my first time in a place where something felt wrong, even if you couldn't quite put your finger on it. The year was 2005, and we were deep in a remote stretch of Alaska, tasked with investigating some unusual happenings at a military outpost. The government doesn't exactly advertise that these things happen, but when soldiers start disappearing in broad daylight and classified equipment goes missing, they send in someone like me. I'm Quentin Arliss, and the job was supposed to be a routine sweep, nothing more. If it had been just that, you wouldn't be hearing about it now. The briefing had been suspiciously light on details. Colonel Harrington had merely slid a thin folder across his desk, his face a mask of practiced indifference. 4 men stationed at Outpost 37 have gone missing in the last month, he'd said. The last communication mentioned equipment malfunction and strange noises from the lower levels. Standard procedure is to assume desertion or accident, but, I'd pressed. But this is the 3rd incident at that location in 20 years. The place should have been decommissioned after the Cold War. Someone keeps it operational for a reason. The helicopter dropped us off 10 miles from the outpost, the pilot refusing to go any closer due to atmospheric disturbances. We trudged through snow that came up to our knees, the bitter cold seeping through our thermal gear despite its military-grade protection. My team consisted of 4 men besides myself. Bennett, the communications specialist with a perpetual scowl. Morris, our weapons expert who could disassemble and reassemble any firearm blindfolded. Reeves, a medic who'd seen enough combat to make most veterans look like rookies. And Kendrick, our demolitions guy who could rig explosives with surgical precision. Then there was Russell, the intelligence officer who'd been forced upon us at the last minute. He wasn't field material, too twitchy, too academic, but he had clearance levels that surpassed even mine. Whatever was happening at Outpost 37, the brass wanted someone with access to know about it. "You're unusually quiet, Russell," I remarked as we made our way through a particularly dense patch of pines. "Care to share what's really going on here?" He adjusted his glasses, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Just following orders, Staff Sergeant. Same as you." "Bull," Bennett muttered. "Nobody sends a team like us for missing persons. What aren't you telling us?" Russell's face remained impassive. "The outpost housed sensitive equipment. That's all you need to know." The place was an abandoned Cold War installation, a long-forgotten relic buried beneath miles of dense, freezing wilderness. On the surface it was mostly concrete bunkers and rusted-out towers, but underneath there were endless corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, most of them inaccessible after decades of neglect. That's where the real concern was. Something was happening down there, and we were sent to find out what. I remember thinking, as we approached the outpost, how desolate it looked. A few decrepit buildings still stood, though they sagged under the weight of years of snow and neglect. And then there were the footprints, or rather, the lack of them. It was winter, and the snow had recently fallen, but it was like the place had been abandoned for ages. That didn't make sense given that soldiers had been stationed there just a few weeks before. There should have been tracks, signs of life, but there was nothing, not a single print. "This doesn't add up," Morris said, voicing what we were all thinking. "If there were men stationed here 2 weeks ago, where are the footprints? The snow's fresh, but not that fresh." Russell pulled out a device that looked like a modified radar gun. "I'm picking up heat signatures from inside the main building. Faint, but present." "Human?" I asked. He frowned. "Inconclusive." We approached the main entrance, a heavy steel door that should have been locked but hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Above it, the faded insignia of some long-defunct military project was barely visible through the frost. "Welcome to Outpost 37, I muttered, shouldering my rifle. "Let's see what's worth dying for out here in the middle of nowhere." The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty corridors, a sound that seemed to bounce back at us from depths we couldn't see. The darkness inside was almost complete, swallowing the beams of our flashlights after just a few feet. "Power should be on," Russell said, consulting his tablet. "Emergency generators at minimum." Kendrick found the main switch panel, its cover hanging loose. "Wiring's been chewed through, something's been at it." "Animals," Reeves suggested. I examined the damage. The cuts were too precise, too deliberate. No animal I've ever seen. We rigged up temporary lighting using our field kits, casting long shadows down the hallways. The place was a maze of corridors and rooms, most of them empty, save for rusted filing cabinets and desks covered in a thick layer of dust. Yet some areas looked recently disturbed, as if someone or something had been moving through the complex. "According to the schematics," Russell said, tracing a path on his tablet, "the main research facility is 2 levels down. That's where the missing personnel were last stationed." "Research facility?" I questioned. "I thought this was an observation post." Russell didn't meet my eyes. It was, among other things. The stairwell leading down was pitch black, our flashlight beams seeming to get swallowed by the darkness rather than penetrate it. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended, carrying a strange smell, like ozone and something else I couldn't quite place. "I don't like this," Morris whispered, his hand tight around his weapon. "Something's off." I nodded. 20 years in the field gives you a sixth sense for danger, and right now every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back. But orders were orders, and whatever was down there, we needed to find it. "Stay alert," I said, taking point as we reached the bottom of the stairs, "and watch each other's backs." Little did I know that within hours, not all of us would be coming back up those stairs alive. The second level of the outpost was in better condition than the first, cleaner, with fewer signs of decay. The lights actually worked here, flickering on automatically as we moved through the hallways. It was as if this part of the facility had been maintained while the upper level was allowed to rot. "Why keep the lower levels operational?" Bennett asked, echoing my thoughts. "Seems like a waste of resources for an abandoned outpost." Russell moved ahead, his attention fixed on a series of readings from his device. The facility was officially decommissioned in 1991, but certain projects remained active. Limited personnel, minimal oversight. "What kind of projects?" I pressed. "The classified kind," he replied, not looking up. The hallway opened into what appeared to be a control room, banks of computers and monitoring equipment arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Most of the screens were dark, but a few still glowed with text and data, scrolling too fast to read. "Someone's been here recently," Reeves noted, running a finger along one of the consoles. "No dust." Morris moved to one of the active monitors, squinting at the display. "These are system logs. Last entry was 13 days ago." I leaned over his shoulder to look. The entry was brief. "Anomalous readings from Sector 7, requesting backup from main facility. No response." The rest was corrupted, digital garbage that made no sense. "What's in Sector 7?" I asked Russell. He consulted his tablet, brow furrowing. "It's not on the official schematics. Must be part of the classified section." "So we have missing personnel, mysterious readings, and a secret area not on the maps," Kendrick summarized. "Just another day in paradise." We continued our exploration, moving through laboratories and storage rooms filled with equipment I didn't recognize. The technology looked advanced, far beyond what should have been available during the Cold War era. In one room we found what appeared to be medical facilities, surgical tables with restraints, monitoring equipment, and walls lined with containers of preserved specimens. They looked like tissue samples, but distorted, wrong somehow. "These are human," Reeves said quietly, examining one of the containers. "But the cellular structure is altered. I've never seen anything like it." Russell was suddenly at his side, taking the container from his hands. These are classified materials. Don't touch anything else. The tension in the room thickened. There was clearly more going on here than a simple search and rescue operation. Time to level with us, Russell, I said, my patience wearing thin. What exactly happened here? What were they working on? He hesitated, then sighed. In the 1980s, this facility was part of a program studying anomalous signals detected in the region. They believed they were intercepting transmissions of non-terrestrial origin. You're saying they were hunting aliens? Bennett scoffed. I'm saying they detected signals they couldn't explain, Russell corrected. The program evolved from passive monitoring to active research. That's all I'm cleared to tell you. And the missing personnel? I pushed. We're here to retrieve data and specimens after unexpected activity was detected last month. They reported finding evidence that the original research team had discovered something. Then they stopped reporting in. A crash from the next room cut our conversation short. We moved instantly into defensive positions, weapons raised. The sound had come from behind a heavy door marked cold storage, authorized personnel only. I nodded to Kendrick, who positioned himself to breach the door, while the rest of us prepared to enter. On my signal, he hit the release and we swept in, flashlights and gun barrels sweeping the darkness. The cold storage room was vast, lined with cylindrical tanks that reached from floor to ceiling. Most were empty, their glass fronts cracked or shattered, but a few still contained murky liquid. Something had clearly broken out of or into several of the tanks, leaving behind twisted metal and broken glass. What the hell were they keeping in these? Morris whispered, his breath visible in the freezing air. I approached one of the intact tanks, wiping condensation from its surface to peer inside. What I saw made me step back involuntarily. Floating in the preservation fluid was what appeared to be a human form, but twisted, changed. The limbs were elongated, jointed in places where no joints should be. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over a frame that wasn't quite human. Was that a person? Reeves asked, his professional detachment slipping. Before Russell could answer, a skittering sound echoed through the room, like nails on metal, but faster, more chaotic. We froze, listening. It seemed to come from above, then behind, then all around us. Movement at your 3 o'clock, Bennett hissed, his rifle tracking something I couldn't see. A shadow darted between the tanks, too fast to follow. Then another on the opposite side of the room. We were surrounded. Fall back to the door, I ordered, keeping my voice steady. Slow and tight. We began to retreat, moving as a unit, backs to each other. The skittering grew louder, more frenzied, as if excited by our movement. That's when we saw the first body. It was wedged between 2 of the broken tanks, almost hidden in the shadows. What remained of the uniform identified it as one of the missing soldiers, but the body itself was barely recognizable as human. It had been torn apart, not by bullets or explosives, but by something with immense strength and precision. The wounds weren't ragged but clean, surgical almost, as if something had been methodically taking the body apart to see how it worked. Russell was fumbling with his equipment, trying to pick up the source of the last transmission when we heard another sound. It was faint, just a rustle like something scraping across the floor. We all froze. The others looked at me for direction, but I didn't have to tell them what to do. We were trained to react instantly, and our weapons were ready. The sound grew louder, but it didn't come from any particular direction. It was all around us, echoing through the long, narrow corridors. Russell whispered something about it being impossible, but I was too focused to pay attention. The scraping stopped, and in its place there was a kind of clicking noise, irregular and too mechanical to be an animal, but too organic to be machinery. We need to move, I said quietly. Now. As if in response, the lights in the cold storage room went out, plunging us into darkness save for our flashlights. In the sudden blackness, the clicking sounds multiplied, coming from every direction at once. Move, I shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. Back to the control room, We ran, the sounds pursuing us through the darkness. Something brushed against my leg as I ran, something cold and rough that moved too quickly to see. Kendrick screamed from somewhere behind me, the sound cut short by a wet, gurgling noise. "Kendrick!" Reeves called, turning back. "Keep moving," I ordered, grabbing his arm. "We can't help him if we're dead." We made it back to the control room, sealing the heavy door behind us. Bennett was bleeding from a cut on his arm. 4 parallel slashes that went straight through his tactical gear. "What the hell was that?" he panted, as Reeves applied pressure to the wound. "Not what," Russell said, his face pale as he stared at his tablet. "How many?" Before I could ask what he meant, the tablet's screen filled with images from security cameras we hadn't noticed before. They showed the corridors we'd just fled through, now crawling with movement. Dark, skeletal figures moved with unnatural speed, some on all fours, others contorting themselves through spaces too small for their frames. They weren't heading toward us. They were heading deeper into the facility. "They're going to Sector 7, Russell whispered. "They know we're here. They're preparing." "Preparing what?" Morris demanded. Russell looked up, his eyes hollow with fear. "The transmission. They're going to send another transmission. Bennett told me to pull out, but that wasn't an option. Not with Kendrick unaccounted for and whatever those things were moving deeper into the facility. If they were heading to this mysterious Sector 7, that's where we needed to go too." "Russell," I said firmly, "no more half-truths. What exactly are we dealing with here?" He hesitated, then set his tablet down, revealing a classified file that shouldn't have been in our possession. In 1983, researchers at this facility detected a signal coming from what they believed was deep space. They managed to isolate and record it, but when they played it back for analysis, something happened. "What kind of something?" Morris pressed. "The researchers exposed to the full signal experienced rapid physiological changes. Their cellular structure began to alter, their DNA rewriting itself. Most died within hours, their bodies rejecting the changes. But a few survived longer, changing into something else. The program was officially terminated, the survivors contained, and the whole incident buried. Those things we saw, they're the survivors from the 80s? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Russell shook his head. "No. Those would have died decades ago. These are new. Someone reactivated the research recently, possibly using the original samples. The team sent in last month must have been exposed." Reeves finished bandaging Bennett's arm. "So what's in Sector 7? "The original transmission equipment," Russell said quietly. "And if my theory is correct, they're trying to boost the signal, send it somewhere, or to someone." The implications hung in the air between us. Whatever these things were, whatever they had once been, they weren't just mindless mutations. They had purpose, direction. "We need to destroy that equipment," I decided, "and then get the hell out of here." "And Kendrick?" Bennett asked. I met his eyes steadily. "We look for him on the way, but the mission comes first." Russell pulled up schematics on his tablet, revealing hidden passages not on the official maps. "Sector 7 is here, at the lowest level. There's an access point through the maintenance tunnels that might bypass wherever those things are gathering. We gathered what supplies we had, including extra ammunition and the few explosives we'd brought with us. Reeves distributed emergency medical kits, small but comprehensive packages that included powerful painkillers and stimulants. "Just in case," he said grimly. We moved carefully through the facility, following Russell's directions to a service elevator hidden behind a false wall in one of the storage rooms. It was barely operational, the mechanisms groaning in protest as we descended to the lowest level. The air changed as we went deeper, becoming thicker, humid, carrying that same strange smell I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now. The walls of the corridor were different too, covered in a thin film of moisture that glistened under our flashlights. "The temperature's rising," Reeves noted, checking a thermometer on his gear. "We're 10 degrees warmer than the level above. Should be getting colder the deeper we go," Morris said. "Not warmer." The maintenance tunnel narrowed as we progressed, forcing us to proceed in single file. The walls were close enough to touch on either side, and in some places we had to crouch to continue forward. The sensation of being buried alive prickled at the back of my neck, but I pushed it down. Focus on the mission. We'd been moving for about 20 minutes when we heard it, a low, pulsing hum that vibrated through the metal around us. It wasn't mechanical. It wavered and fluctuated in patterns too irregular for machinery. "That's it," Russell whispered. "The signal. They've already started." The tunnel eventually opened into a larger space, a junction where several passages converged. The humming was louder here, coming from a passage directly ahead. But that wasn't what stopped us in our tracks. The walls were covered in a strange web-like growth that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. It spread across the ceiling and floor, thicker in some places than others, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like circuit boards or neural networks. "Don't touch it," Russell warned. "The growth is a physical manifestation of the signal. Direct contact could trigger transformation." As if to emphasize his point, we noticed shapes embedded in the thicker sections of the growth, human shapes, partially absorbed into the web-like structure. Their features were distorted, mouths frozen in silent screams, limbs elongated and fused with the growth around them. "Jesus," Morris breathed, then caught himself. "Sorry." I recognized one of the faces, or what was left of it. "That's Kendrick." His body was half absorbed into the wall, one arm still free but transformed, the fingers unnaturally long and jointed. His eyes were open but clouded over, unseeing. "Is he—" Bennett couldn't finish the question. Russell shook his head. "He's part of it now. They all are." The humming intensified, pulsing through the air around us. With each wave, the growth on the walls seemed to expand slightly, reaching further along the tunnels. "It's spreading," I realized. "The signal is strengthening the growth, and the growth is amplifying the signal. It's a feedback loop." "We need to move," Russell urged. "Sector 7 is just ahead. We need to destroy the transmission equipment before the signal reaches full strength." We pressed forward, careful not to touch the walls. The passage leading to Sector 7 was almost completely overtaken by the growth, leaving only a narrow path down the center. The humming had become a physical presence, pressing against our ears and vibrating through our bodies. The door to Sector 7 was massive, a reinforced blast door designed to contain whatever was inside. It stood partially open, a gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. Beyond it, bright light pulsed in rhythm with the humming. "Charges on the transmission equipment," I ordered Morris. "We blow it and get out. Quick and clean." He nodded, readying the explosives we'd brought. Bennett and Reeves positioned themselves to provide cover, while Russell hovered near the door, his eyes fixed on his tablet as he monitored the signal strength. "It's spiking," he warned. "Whatever they're doing in there, they're reaching some kind of crescendo." I peered through the gap in the door. The room beyond was vast, its walls entirely covered in the luminescent growth. In the center stood what appeared to be the source of the light, a column of energy that stretched from floor to ceiling, pulsing with colors that hurt to look at directly. Around the column, the creatures moved in a strange, synchronized dance. There were dozens of them, their elongated bodies weaving in and out of the light. They weren't random mutations as I'd first thought, but precisely engineered forms. Some had multiple limbs that ended in delicate, tool-like appendages. Others had what looked like specialized sensory organs protruding from their torsos. And at the base of the column, partially emerged from the growth on the floor, was something else. Larger than the others, its form more fully transformed. It barely resembled anything human, its body a complex arrangement of limbs and sensory organs wrapped around a central mass. It seemed to be directing the others, its movements dictating the rhythm of their dance. "That's the primary receiver," Russell whispered, pointing to the large creature. "It's channeling the signal through itself, directing the others to amplify and transmit." "Can we kill it?" I asked. "Destroy the equipment," he replied. The column is the transmitter. Without it, the signal can't propagate. We found it at the entrance to one of the sealed-off underground tunnels. The door was half open, despite the fact that it should have been locked tight. Inside, the light flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. That's when we saw it. At first glance, it looked like a pile of bones, old and weathered. But then I realized the bones were fresh, too fresh. And they weren't animal bones. Russell backed up fast, muttering under his breath. I stepped forward, reaching down to inspect the remains. There was something strange about the way they were scattered, almost as if they had been arranged. That's when the stench hit me. It was sharp, metallic, like blood mixed with rust. Morris was the first to notice the movement. I barely had time to register his shout before something shot out of the shadows. It was fast. Too fast. Morris went down hard, his body dragged into the darkness before anyone could react. I've seen a lot in my time, but nothing moved like that. And I wasn't about to let another one of my team get taken. I ordered the rest of us to fall back, but the thing didn't give us a chance. It came at us again, this time from the ceiling, dropping down with a sickening thud. We opened fire, but it was like shooting at smoke. It darted through the bullets, a blur of movement and sharp angles. That's when I got my first good look at it. It was big, at least 7 feet tall when it stood up, but it was hunched over, its back arched like a spider. Its limbs were long, too long, and twisted at odd angles. It had skin or something close to it, but it was stretched too tight over its bones, making it look like it had been pulled from some ancient tomb. And its mouth, if you could call it that, was filled with rows of jagged, crooked teeth. It moved like a snake, slithering over the ground in a way that didn't make sense for something so large. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't about to stick around and find out. Russell was useless at that point, mumbling about how it couldn't be real, how none of this made sense. He was right, but now wasn't the time for existential breakdowns. We needed to get out fast. Morris was gone, and I wasn't about to lose anyone else. We fell back, firing at the thing to keep it at bay. It seemed to be toying with us, letting us think we had a chance. We barely made it to the entrance when I felt something grab my leg. I went down hard, smashing my knee against the concrete. I looked back, and there it was, dragging itself toward me, its long fingers curled around my boot. I kicked at it, but its grip was like iron. I fired point blank into its face. The thing screamed, a horrible, bone-rattling noise that made my head spin, but it let go. We didn't stop running until we were back outside, the cold air slapping us awake. Russell collapsed in the snow, gasping for breath. I looked around, expecting it to follow us, but the thing stayed inside. It didn't come after us. That's when I noticed the second set of footprints. They weren't ours, and they weren't human. They led away from the outpost, heading deep into the woods, like the thing had friends out there, waiting for us to come to them. I wasn't about to give it that chance. "We need to go back in," I said, after we'd caught our breath. The statement hung in the frigid air between us, drawing looks of disbelief from Bennett and Reeves. "You saw what happened to Morris," Bennett protested, "and Kendrick. We're outmatched." "And outgunned," Reeves added. "Our weapons barely slowed that thing down." Russell had recovered somewhat, though his face remained pale. "The staff sergeant is right. If we don't destroy the transmission equipment, whatever signal they're sending will only grow stronger. It could spread beyond the facility." "How far?" I asked. "Theoretically, unlimited range. The original signal came from deep space. There's no reason to think the response wouldn't reach just as far." The implications sank in. This wasn't just about a few missing soldiers anymore, or even about what happened to Morris and Kendrick. If that signal reached its destination, whatever had happened here could happen elsewhere, perhaps everywhere. "We go back," I decided, but not the same way. "Russell, you said the original transmission equipment is in Sector 7. Is there another way to access it?" He consulted his tablet. fingers trembling slightly as he navigated through the classified schematics. There's a ventilation system that runs throughout the lower levels. It connects to Sector 7 from the east side of the facility. It would be tight, but passable. And the explosives? I looked to Bennett, who had taken charge of our demolition gear after Kendrick was lost. We've got enough to bring down the whole sector if we place them right, he confirmed. But we'd need to get close to the core of whatever's generating that signal. I nodded, formulating a plan. We use the ventilation system to bypass the main corridors where those things are patrolling. Get as close as possible to the transmission equipment, plant the charges, and get out, quick and clean. Those vents will be a kill box if they find us, Reeves pointed out. No room to maneuver, no way to retreat. Then we make sure they don't find us, I said simply. Russell, how much time do we have before that signal reaches full strength? He checked his readings. Based on the energy fluctuations I detected earlier, I'd estimate less than 2 hours. Then we move now. Gear check. Weapons, ammo, explosives. Leave behind anything that might slow you down or make noise. We stripped down to essential equipment, distributing the explosives between Bennett and me as a precaution. Reeves packed light medical supplies, focusing on items that might counteract whatever transformative effects the signal had on human physiology. Russell kept only his tablet and a small case of specialized equipment I didn't recognize. What's that? I asked, nodding to the case. Signal jammers, he replied. Short range, but they might disrupt the creature's ability to communicate with each other. They operate on a hive mind of sorts. The primary receiver coordinates their actions through subsonic frequencies. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because using them puts us at risk too. The jammers don't discriminate. They'll affect any technology in range, including our comms. And there's a chance they might agitate the creatures rather than disrupt them. A chance we'll have to take, I decided. We use them only when necessary, and only for short bursts. We re-entered the facility through a maintenance hatch Russell identified from his schematics, bypassing the main entrance where we'd first encountered the creatures. The access led to a utility corridor that smelled of mildew and rust, its walls lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Ventilation access is 50 meters ahead, Russell whispered, leading the way. The shafts are maintenance-sized on this level, but they narrow as they approach Sector 7. The access panel to the ventilation system was partially corroded, its edges crusted with the same strange growth we'd seen in the lower levels, though much less developed here. It took both Bennett and me to pry it open, the metal groaning in protest. The shaft beyond was dark and cramped, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. A faint breeze carried that now familiar smell, metallic and organic at the same time, like ozone mixed with decay. I'll take point, I said, shouldering my rifle and preparing to enter the shaft. Russell, you're next with the tablet. Guide us through this maze. Bennett, then Reeves. Keep it quiet. The ventilation system was a nightmare of tight turns and junctions, the metal walls pressing in from all sides. Our progress was painfully slow, each movement calculated to minimize noise. The further we went, the warmer it became, the air growing thick with moisture that condensed on the shaft walls. And with the heat came the growth, thin at first, just traces along the seams of the metal but thickening as we descended. In some places it pulsed with that same bioluminescence we'd seen earlier, casting an eerie blue light through the shafts. We're approaching the 3rd level, Russell whispered, his voice barely audible over the increasing hum that vibrated through the metal around us. Sector 7 is directly below us now. I paused at a junction, peering down a vertical shaft that seemed to drop into darkness. Is that our route? Russell nodded. It leads to a maintenance room adjacent to Sector 7. From there, we can access the main chamber without crossing the areas where the creatures were concentrated. The descent was treacherous, the handhold slick with moisture and growth. Twice I nearly lost my grip, saved only by years of training and raw instinct. Below me, I could hear the others struggling similarly, their breathing heavy in the confined space. The shaft ended at another access panel, this one heavily overgrown with the luminescent material. It bulged inward as if something were pressing against it from the other side, pulsing in rhythm with the now deafening hum. "We need to break through," I said, drawing my combat knife. "But be ready. No telling what's waiting on the other side." I scraped at the growth, trying to clear the edges of the panel. The material was surprisingly resilient, more like cartilage than plant matter, and it seemed to recoil from the blade. When I finally managed to pry the panel loose, a rush of hot, fetid air burst into the shaft, carrying with it a chorus of those clicking sounds we'd heard earlier. The maintenance room beyond was unrecognizable, completely transformed by the growth. It covered every surface, thicker here than anywhere we'd seen before, forming complex structures that resembled organic machinery. Pulsing veins of bioluminescence ran through it, all converging toward a doorway on the far side of the room. "Sector 7 is through there," Russell whispered. "The primary transmission equipment will be in the center of the chamber." We climbed down from the shaft cautiously, avoiding contact with the growth as much as possible. The floor yielded slightly underfoot, like walking on living tissue rather than concrete and metal. "How much of this stuff is there?" Bennett asked, disgust evident in his voice. "It's spread throughout the lower levels," Russell replied, "growing exponentially as the signal strengthens. At this rate, it will encompass the entire facility within days." "Charges here would be ineffective," I noted, surveying the room. "We need to hit the source directly." We approached the doorway, moving as silently as possible despite the yielding floor. Beyond it lay Sector 7 proper, a vast chamber that had once been filled with research equipment, but was now almost entirely transformed. The central column of energy I'd glimpsed earlier now dominated the space, a pillar of shifting light that stretched from floor to ceiling. Around it, the creatures moved in their strange, synchronized patterns, more numerous than before. Dozens of the transformed beings, their elongated limbs and distorted bodies weaving through the light in what almost resembled worship. And at the base of the column, partially merged with the growth, was the primary receiver, the largest of the creatures, its body a complex arrangement of sensory organs and limbs. It pulsed in time with the column, its movements directing the others. "The transmission equipment," Russell whispered, pointing to a series of structures embedded in the growth near the column. "It's been absorbed, integrated into their biology, but the core components are still there. That's what we need to destroy." "How close do we need to get?" Bennett asked, readying the explosives. "Within 20 meters for maximum effect," Russell calculated. "Any further and the growth might absorb enough of the blast to protect the essential components." I surveyed the chamber, noting the patterns of movement among the creatures. They seemed focused on the column, their attention directed inward. If we stayed along the periphery of the room, using the growth as cover, we might be able to approach close enough to plant the charges undetected. "We move along the east wall," I decided. "Bennett, prepare 3 charges. Primary target is that equipment cluster. Russell, stand by with the jammers in case we're spotted. Reeves, cover our 6. If anything comes at us from behind, take it down quietly if possible." We began our approach, staying low and using the uneven terrain created by the growth to mask our movements. The creatures remained focused on their ritual, seemingly unaware of our presence. The hum of the transmission grew louder as we neared the column, pressing against our skulls with almost physical force. We were 30 meters from the target when one of the creatures suddenly broke from the group, its elongated head swiveling in our direction. It paused as if scenting the air, then began moving toward our position with that unnatural fluid motion. "It knows we're here," Bennett whispered, his hand moving to his weapon. "Hold," I ordered. "No noise unless absolutely necessary." The creature drew closer, its body weaving through the growth with disturbing ease. It was one of the smaller ones, its form less fully transformed than others, with vestiges of human features still visible beneath the changes. As it approached, I realized with a shock that I recognized the distorted face. It was Morris, or what had once been Morris. His eyes were now milky white, unseeing in the conventional sense but clearly perceiving something. The lower half of his face had split into mandible-like structures that clicked rhythmically as he moved. His body had elongated, joints rearranged, skin stretched and pale. He paused just meters from our position, head tilting as if listening. For a moment, I thought he might retain some fragment of his former self, some recognition of his team. Then he screamed, a high piercing sound that cut through the hum of the transmission like a knife. "Now!" I shouted, abandoning stealth as the other creatures turned toward us, alerted by Morris's cry. "Russell, jammers!" Russell activated his devices, throwing them toward different parts of the chamber. They flared to life with a pulse of energy that disrupted the rhythm of the hum. The effect on the creatures was immediate. They staggered, movements becoming uncoordinated and erratic. We sprinted toward the equipment cluster, firing at any creature that came too close. The bullets seemed more effective now, the jammers apparently weakening whatever force made them so resilient before. "Cover me!" Bennett shouted, dropping to one knee as he reached the target area. He worked quickly, attaching the explosive charges to what remained of the original equipment embedded in the growth. The primary receiver at the base of the column was writhing in apparent agony, its many limbs thrashing as the jammers disrupted its connection to the others. But even as we watched, it began to adapt, its movements becoming more purposeful again. "The jammers are losing effectiveness," Russell warned. "We have minutes at most." "Charges set," Bennett called. "Remote detonator ready." "Fall back to the maintenance room," I ordered. "Move." We retreated as the creatures began to recover, their movements regaining that fluid, coordinated quality. The one that had been Morris was in pursuit, leading several others in our direction. They were faster than us, gaining ground with each passing second. "Use the second jammer," I shouted to Russell. He activated another device, tossing it behind us. It bought us precious seconds as the creatures recoiled from its effects, allowing us to reach the maintenance room. "Back into the shaft," I directed, helping Reeves up first. Russell, then Bennett. As they climbed, I held position at the doorway, firing controlled bursts at the advancing creatures. They were moving more cautiously now, spreading out to surround our position rather than rushing in directly. "Staff Sergeant, come on," Bennett called from the shaft. I backed toward the access point, keeping my weapon trained on the doorway. The creatures had paused just beyond the threshold as if reluctant to enter. The Morris thing was at their center, its head tilted in that strange, evaluating angle. For a brief moment our eyes met, his milky white, mine wide with adrenaline. And in that instant I saw something flicker across what remained of his face. Recognition, perhaps, or something else entirely. Then I was in the shaft, pulling the access panel closed behind me. "Go! Up! Fast as you can!" We climbed frantically, the sounds of pursuit echoing through the shaft below us. Claws or something like them scraped against metal, the creatures forcing their way into the ventilation system. "How far to the exit?" I gasped to Russell. 200 meters, he replied. "First junction, then right, straight to the utility corridor." "Bennett, the detonator!" He fumbled in his pocket, producing the remote trigger for the explosives. "Ready." "Wait until we reach the junction," I ordered. "We need more distance." The shaft seemed endless, each meter a struggle against gravity and fatigue. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, punctuated by that clicking communication. They were gaining on us, their transformed bodies better adapted to the confined space than our human frames. Finally, we reached the junction, turning right toward the exit, as Russell had directed. "Now!" I shouted to Bennett. He pressed the detonator. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world seemed to buckle around us. The explosion ripped through the facility beneath us, the shockwave traveling up through the ventilation system like a solid wall of force. The shaft bucked and twisted, metal shrieking as welds tore free. We were thrown against the walls, tumbling through the suddenly unstable passage. Behind us, the creatures screamed, not in pain but in something that sounded disturbingly like triumph. Then the screams were cut short as the shaft behind us collapsed inward, crushed by structural failures cascading through the facility. We crawled desperately toward the exit, the ventilation system crumbling around us. Ahead, I could see light, the utility corridor, our way out. "Move," I urged, pushing Reeves ahead of me as a section of shaft behind us gave way. We spilled out into the corridor in a tangle of limbs and equipment, scrambling to our feet as the entire wall shuddered. Cracks raced across the concrete, spreading like lightning from floor to ceiling. "The whole place is coming down," Bennett realized. "We need to get topside." We ran through the buckling corridors, dodging falling debris and equipment. The growth that had spread through the lower levels was reacting to the destruction, writhing and pulsing with agitated light. In some places it seemed to be trying to shore up failing structures, forming tendrils that stretched across gaps in the concrete. The stairwell to the surface was partially blocked by fallen ceiling panels, forcing us to climb over precariously balanced debris. Above us, emergency lights flashed warnings, the facility's automated systems finally responding to the catastrophic damage. When we reached the main level, the destruction was less severe but still spreading. We sprinted through the entrance hall, burst through the main doors, and kept running until we were clear of the outpost's perimeter. Behind us, the central building collapsed inward with a roar of concrete and metal, dust billowing into the frigid Alaskan air. The outlying structures followed, one by one, as the foundations beneath them gave way. We watched from a safe distance as the facility was reduced to rubble, the snow around it darkening with dust and debris. For several minutes no one spoke, our breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Did we stop it?" Bennett finally asked. "The transmission?" Russell was checking his tablet, which had somehow survived the escape. "Energy readings are falling rapidly. The primary equipment was destroyed." He looked up, his expression still troubled. "But the signal was active for nearly an hour before we intervened, long enough to reach its destination." "And what happens now?" Reeves asked. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. I wasn't about to give them the chance to find us. We radioed for extraction, but by the time help arrived, it was too late for Morris. His body, or what was left of it, was found inside the bunker, torn apart like something had used him for practice. The rescue team arrived 3 hours after our call, a Black Hawk helicopter appearing over the horizon like a mirage. They brought medical personnel, additional security forces, and a team of specialists in hazmat suits who immediately cordoned off the ruins of the outpost. We were separated upon arrival at the nearest military base, each taken to isolated quarters for medical observation. The debriefings began immediately, endless hours of questions from stern-faced officers and civilian specialists whose credentials were never shared. They wanted to know everything: what we'd seen, what we'd heard, what we'd touched. They were particularly interested in any physical contact with the growth or the creatures, scrutinizing every scratch and bruise as if looking for signs of transformation. Russell wasn't among the questioners. In fact, I didn't see him again after we were separated. When I asked about him, I was told he was assisting with containment procedures, whatever that meant. Bennett and Reeves were similarly isolated. During one brief encounter in a corridor between debriefings, Bennett managed to whisper that they'd been running blood tests on him hourly, looking for something they wouldn't specify. He looked haggard, his eyes sunken, the wound on his arm bandaged but clearly still painful. "They know more than they're telling us," he murmured before we were ushered away from each other. "This isn't the first time this has happened." After 3 days of isolation and questioning, I was finally brought before Colonel Harrington, the man who had assigned us the mission in the first place. He looked older than I remembered, his face etched with new lines of worry. "Sit down, Staff Sergeant," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I believe it's time we had a frank discussion." "About what happened at Outpost 37, sir?" I asked, taking the seat. "About what happens next." He slid a folder across the desk, different from the one he'd given me before the mission, thicker and marked with classification levels I'd never seen before. The official report on the incident. I opened it cautiously. The document inside was heavily redacted. black lines obscuring most of the text. What remained was a clinical account of a containment failure, resulting in the loss of research materials and the deaths of several personnel due to environmental hazards. No mention of the creatures, no mention of the transmission, no mention of Morris or Kendrick being transformed rather than simply killed. "This is bull, sir," I said, closing the folder. "This isn't what happened." "It's what happened officially," Harrington replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And it's what you'll confirm happened if asked." "And if I don't?" He sighed, suddenly looking very tired. "Quentin, I've known you for a long time. You're one of my best. But what happened at Outpost 37 goes beyond you, beyond me, beyond even the military. Some things are classified not because they're secret, but because people couldn't handle knowing them." "People deserve to know if we're not alone," I countered. "If something out there is trying to change us." "Do they?" He leaned forward. "What would happen if word got out that an alien signal can transform humans into something else? The panic? The chaos?" He shook his head. "And that's assuming it's alien at all. We don't know what it is, not really. The original researchers thought it came from space, but others believed it might have emerged from somewhere much closer. Perhaps from within the Earth itself, from depths we've never explored." I remembered the creatures' movements, their behavior, how they seemed to be conducting some kind of ritual around that column of energy. They were sending a signal back, I realized, calling to whatever sent the original transmission. Harrington nodded slightly. "That's one theory. Another is that they were simply trying to spread, broadcasting the same signal that changed them to affect others elsewhere." "And did they succeed?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Before we destroyed the equipment?" He was silent for a long moment. "We don't know. No similar incidents have been reported, but..." He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging between us. "But it could take time," I finished for him. "Days, weeks, months before anything happens. If it happens." "Precisely." He closed the folder, reclaiming it from my side of the desk. "Which is why we maintain monitoring stations around the globe. Why we keep facilities like Outpost 37 operational despite official decommissioning. We listen, we watch, and when necessary, we contain." "And the others?" I asked. "Bennett, Reeves?" "They'll be released back to active duty shortly, with appropriate reassignments. Far from Alaska." He gave me a meaningful look. "As will you." "And Russell?" Something flickered across Harrington's face. Discomfort, perhaps, or concern. "Intelligence Officer Russell has returned to his regular duties." It was a non-answer, and we both knew it. "Sir, with all due respect, we deserve to know if we're at risk. If what happened to Morris and Kendrick could happen to us." Harrington hesitated, then nodded slightly. "The medical evaluations show no signs of unusual physiological changes in you or the other survivors. The transformation appears to require either direct exposure to the original signal or prolonged contact with the growth it generates. You had neither." "And the growth itself? The ruins of the outpost?" "Being handled appropriately." Another non-answer. "The site has been completely quarantined, and what remains is being systematically sterilized." I wanted to believe him, but the memory of those second set of footprints in the snow lingered. They'd led away from the outpost, into the wilderness. At least one of the creatures had left before we arrived. Perhaps more. "The official report will state that you and your team encountered a toxic chemical leak resulting from old Soviet experiments," Harrington continued. "That you heroically managed to prevent its spread by triggering a controlled demolition of the facility, but tragically lost 2 men in the process." He met my eyes steadily. "Your commendations are being processed. You'll receive the Silver Star for your actions." "For a lie," I said quietly. "For saving lives," he corrected. "Perhaps more than you know." I was dismissed shortly after, given 2 weeks leave before my new assignment. A training post at Fort Bragg, about as far from Alaska as the military could send me while keeping me in the continental United States. Bennett and Reeves received similar reassignments, each to different locations. We were being separated, our shared experience buried along with the truth about Outpost 37. The official report said Morris died in an accident. That's how they always explain it. Just another casualty of a training exercise gone wrong, but we knew better. A few days later, Russell disappeared. No one could find him. They said he probably ran, couldn't handle the stress, but I don't think that's what happened. I think whatever was out there got him. Or perhaps he found something in those classified files he couldn't live with. Or couldn't live without. And I think it's still out there, waiting for someone else to show up. The thing about Alaska is that it doesn't care if you're prepared, if you're trained, if you think you know what's coming. It'll take you anyway, leave you frozen and forgotten, like Morris and Kendrick, and maybe Russell too. I never went back. Whatever they sent to clean up that place, I don't want to know how it ended. Some things are better left buried. I figure if I ever hear another one of those transmissions, I'll just turn off the radio. There are some calls you don't need to answer, but sometimes in the deepest hours of the night, I find myself listening, really listening, to the spaces between stations, to the static and white noise that most people ignore, listening for patterns, for rhythms that shouldn't be there, for clicking sounds like the ones we heard in those corridors. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear them. Faint but growing stronger, like something calling from very far away, or getting closer. And as for Morris, well, if there's one upside to this whole mess, it's that the guy owed me $20. Guess I won't have to worry about collecting on that. But in the darkest moments, when I'm honest with myself, I know that debt might come due in other ways. The footprints leading away from the outpost haunt me still. Whatever we encountered there, whatever we briefly contained, it isn't over. It's just waiting, calling, transforming. I check my skin sometimes, looking for changes, for signs that something has begun to alter me from within. So far, nothing. But the night is long, and the signal, I fear, travels farther than we know. My name is William Hawkins, but everyone calls me Will. I'm a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. It's not just a job for me, it's my life. My family's been tied to this land for generations. My grandfather was a ranger here, and my dad followed in his footsteps. Now it's my turn. I know every trail, every tree, and every stream like the back of my hand. But this fall, something felt off. The drought had been dragging on for months, and the streams that usually ran clear and strong were nothing but dry beds of cracked earth. The forest was quieter than usual, almost too quiet. Even the animals seemed uneasy. One morning, as I was walking along one of the older trails, I noticed something strange in one of the dried-up stream beds. The roots of the trees were exposed, but they didn't look normal. They twisted and curled in unnatural ways, almost like they were reaching for something, or someone. Some of them even had patterns that looked like veins or circuits. I crouched down to get a closer look, and my stomach tightened with unease. I stood up quickly and tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It's just the drought affecting things, I told myself, trying to sound convincing, but deep down I wasn't so sure. Later that day, I met up with Dr. Amelia Richardson, the park historian. Amelia's been researching Appalachian folklore for years, and she knows more about this area's history than anyone else alive. She was tracking down old settler stories about strange happenings in the mountains, tales of people disappearing or seeing things that couldn't be explained. "Will," she said as we walked along a trail together, "have you ever heard of the Rooted One?" I raised an eyebrow at her. "The Rooted One? Can't say I have." She nodded thoughtfully and adjusted her glasses. "It's an old legend from the settlers who first came here in the 1800s. They talked about something living deep in the forest, something connected to the roots of the trees." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like campfire stories to me." Amelia gave me a serious look. Maybe, but there are too many accounts to ignore. Her words stuck with me as I went about my day, leading guided tours, clearing trails, and documenting how the drought was affecting the ecosystem. My daughter Lily was visiting for the summer, and she joined me on